who was up on stage at the podium doing all the speaking. And yet at all of our very large community events, one would often find Tacola not up on stage speaking, and he was the director of health education, but rather he'd be at the back of the room, you know, talking with people and just kind of strengthening his relationships. And in fact, I know he would be horrified to have me even be mentioning him and exalting him in this speech because of his incredible humility. And he was really more of a colleague and a friend than a supervisor. We really worked together. And he was never intimidated by my or anyone else's kind of ideas and our drive and our passion. In fact, he understood that a good leader is going to select colleagues who are complementary to them and who really help kind of bring forth all the best talent in the workplace. And he never was, you know, threatened or tried to dampen us. Instead, he would really push us to the fore and really encouraged me to kind of be the passionate person that I was. And so I'll be forever grateful for his example of humility. And I think about Barbara Crane, Dr. Barbara Crane, who I worked with at IPASS, and she was an executive vice president there. And whenever we were working together on large global initiatives, I would say, well, let's make sure that IPASS is the lead agency on that, or we want to make sure IPASS's name is on the cover of that document. And she would caution me and say, you know, it's okay. There are other ways to assert influence. And she would work behind the scenes, and you know, we ended up ghostwriting a lot of WHO guidance that, you know, nobody knew that we were the ones who wrote that guidance because it had WHO on the cover, not us personally or not the agency. And she would talk individually with her many, many contacts to encourage them to make statements and declarations and to have their agencies really take a stance on, for example, safe abortion care. And was able to affect such incredible change, not because she was up in front, again, at the podium, but because she was in the back having the conversations with those leaders and letting them really be the face of the issue for their agency, which is the way that it should be. And so again, she's really taught me a lot about the role of humility. Dr. Brene Brown, who's a celebrity sociologist and thought leader, says, I spent a lot of years trying to outrun or outsmart vulnerability by making things certain and definite, black and white, good and bad. My inability to lean into the discomfort of vulnerability limited the fullness of those important experiences that are wrought with uncertainty, like love and belonging and trust and joy and creativity, to name a few, and I'll add leadership. So I just encourage you to think about vulnerability and humility as strengths and as important leadership qualities and how they can really change the face of leadership for us. So finally, the third theme I wanted to talk about is sustainability, or that leadership is not really about us. None of us is irreplaceable. Tacola would say that to me all the time when people were leaving, and I'd say, oh no, how are we going to do the work? And he'd say, Kat, none of us is irreplaceable. Someone else will come along to do the work. When we're done doing this work, someone else will be doing it. And so how will our work live beyond us? And how are we planning for that? So I work with a number of organizations on succession planning, and this whole issue of the founder syndrome is a common one. A very brilliant, charismatic person will form an agency or a university or a foundation, and they will head that up and drive and lead that, and everyone follows behind them. And then when they are getting ready to leave, if they haven't put a good succession plan in place, if they haven't been mentoring and fostering that leadership all along, what will happen to the work? If the work is still needed, then it is incumbent on leaders to plan for our departure and to really foster the next generation of leaders and specifically plan for how they will be succeeded. At 1.8 billion, young people aged 10 to 24 make up more than a quarter of the world's population. That's the largest population of youth ever in the history of humanity. So we think about this massive youth population. How are we helping this incredible quarter of the world's population assume leadership? knowing that we will all be moving on and that we need this next generation to take on the leadership role. How are we helping them to develop their meaningful life and career for themselves? And as I've advanced in my career, I've always really made it a priority to work very closely with students and young people. And it's difficult because we're all busy, but I get a lot of emails from students saying, I'd love to talk with you about my career, I'm not sure what to do, or if you know of any opportunities for me, you know, and I always try to make time for them sometime and forward opportunities to really help them find their way, because other people helped me. And so regardless, even if you're new in your career or younger, how are you helping to mentor people who are younger than you? And if you're more established, who are you helping along in their careers? The quote here is, leadership is not a person or a position. It's a complex moral relationship between people based on trust, obligation, commitment, emotion, and a shared vision of the good. And that's Joanne Chuela at the University of Richmond. So I founded my consulting firm, Global Citizen, on the firm belief that with awareness, understanding, sensitivity, and practice, we can foster global citizenry, global competence at the individual and institutional level, and we can engage in mutually beneficial relationships in order to develop solutions that are empowering for everyone. And I do this work in a variety of domains in the US and internationally, with nonprofits, with foundations, corporations, universities, colleges, because I really believe that we are a global society and we need to learn how to work effectively together so that we can advance good work and do it in an ethical way. You know, as we become increasingly global, we know that there is a danger that we can do this work in a way that really isn't enhancing the lives and health of people around the world. So how are we checking ourselves to know that even our approaches and our partnerships are truly ethical and that they're really mutual? So we have to ask ourselves about that in our work, constantly in our design, asking ourselves, how are we really partnering and valuing our partners around the world in this work? So for me, it's not a coincidence or some kind of magical occurrence that we all find ourselves here together in this room in Parazad in Durham, North Carolina in the United States. I think that we all are interconnected. We all have a relationship with each other, a responsibility to each other. None of us is alone in this world. What we do affects others, what others do affect us. We're incredibly interconnected. And so as we think about this interconnectivity, this brings back the issue of leadership and mentorship. So think about what legacy you want to leave for those behind you. And how can you, again, help young people along in their path. So I'll end with some questions for you about your leadership and your mentorship. What leadership qualities do you strive to embody? And how will you honor your mentors by mentoring those who are coming along behind you? And what will your legacy be? Thank you.